What's email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today I'm pleased to be joined by my friend Cliff Oxford. Cliff is a successful entrepreneur having started and sold multiple companies who now mentors other entrepreneurs as they grow and exit their businesses. He's been a featured columnist for the New York Times and Forbes and has authored several books including Lambs to Leaders, No Grow Exit, and his latest, Redneck Reverie. Cliff, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks, Clint. I've been looking forward to this because I hadn't talked to you in a while, so maybe during this podcast we can catch up.
I think so. So I noticed that, you spent some time down in South Georgia. Are you from there originally?
I am originally from South Georgia, as we would say down there, born and raised, and it was actually in the Okefenokee Swamp.
Right.
It was about as far south as you can go in South Georgia.
I was going to ask you specifically about the Okefenokee because I know that's something near and dear to your heart.
Yes, it is. We growing up there, you learn to live off the land. You learn to respect the land. You learn to respect people for whom they are. So it was a big impact on my life. And today we got a company trying to mine titanium, and not to bore everybody, but a swamp is actually an elegant hydraulic system. It absorbs water and releases water depending upon the climate. And we're very concerned that if you start drilling, you punch a hole in that aquifer, you could have a serious issue.
Sure. I guess so. How are they handling the pandemic down there? Is everybody doing the shelter in place well, or does it really matter because they're growing their own food anyway? How are they handling things down there?
Not much has changed. There's no pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. It's just pretty much the same. Quite frankly, in those areas, the real COVID was the offshoring of jobs. I think everybody knows the opioid epidemic is far more worse than the COVID pandemic. So the opioids changed that part of the world and all rural areas. So there's no big change between pandemic down there.
Okay, I gotcha. Well, I noticed some of your Southern colloquialisms, they kind of filter into your writings. I was looking at some of the articles on the New York Times and the Forbes that you've written, and I know you have one about the cottonmouth, and so it kind of filters into your writings. I do know about the cottonmouth. I was born and raised in South Carolina, man. So
okay, all right.
We got some swamps in South Carolina too.
Yes, you do. The cottonmouth that's the beast of the swamp.
It is.
Everybody thinks of the alligator, but the alligators normally run from you. The cottonmouth is territorial, and if you step in their territory, they will actually attack you.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is probably a pretty good transition into the business world, right?
Yeah. I wrote about the cottonmouth for Walmart. I called Walmart the cottonmouth.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I read it because you had another reference that was near and dear to my heart because I was a bag boy at Piggly Wiggly growing up. And you mentioned the Piggly Wiggly in one of your articles, and I thought, if you're not from the South, you probably have no idea what the Piggly Wiggly is.
I had many questions from that New York Times article that said, what is a Piggly Wiggly?
It's a Southern thing.
Yes.
So when you started off your career, I think it started while you were still in college. You were working at UPS. Is that right?
Yeah, one Christmas I went and worked at UPS during a Christmas, and I was going to do it for a Christmas holidays. And 10 years later, I left and actually retired from UPS at age 29. They had a buyout, so I left as the national IS manager, which when I started as a helper to the delivery driver and helper loading the trucks, I had no idea I would be leaving 10 years later, but that was my journey there.
And when I read it was a pretty good journey. Obviously, UPS is a top 50 company, Fortune top 50. I think about these big, huge companies, and I kind of think in my mind of when I think about communication in these big organizations, I see these extremes, right? I see one where people are just in meeting after meeting for hour after hour, and productivity is just, it's counterproductive to productivity actually. And then I also kind of see these edicts from on high where the troops get it and read the edict and go the email and go, this is never going to happen. What is he thinking, right? So what was kind of your experience at a top 50 company like that is when you think about communications?
Well, it was very unique because when I joined UPS, we were still a truck driving company and still had founder values. First time I went to the corporate office, it was 110 clerks and a few managers because Jim Casey did not want a big corporate office. And that was the values of the company. So I was there during that time, and it was a truck driving company, and it was not the bureaucracy that you normally would see. But when they made a decision to move to Atlanta and change the company, and it went to more the corporate environment, and that's where I got isolated there. But when I was there, I was at a truck driving company that Fred Smith of FedEx said had more money than God. But what we didn't have was a computer. We had clipboards. And I was part of that whole process from the ground floor where they said, we're going to spend $5 billion on computers over the next 3 years, and we're going to surpass FedEx. I mean, how many times do you get that opportunity? I mean, what right place, right time. I mean, they taught me so much, but I did make it to the corporate office, and that's where my entrepreneurial instincts and everything clashed. And I was glad to take that buyout. And to be honest with you, they were glad that I did. I don't know who was the happiest that day. Them or me. I don't know. It was a toss-up.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that I was thinking of to talk to you about is, I know you as more of an entrepreneurial spirit, kind of a big picture strategy guy. And I think of UPS, I think of really buttoned down operations, execution, detail. And those two things didn't really go together very well in my mind.
I was fortunate to be promoted there 9 times. So when I had to execute, and I mean, even at STI, we received the Gartner Group as visionary in execution and technology industry one year in their Magic Quadrant. So I've always had a very execution mindset. But what I couldn't take is the bureaucracy. And you know what? People in corporations are happy to sit in meetings, and it's not really the corporation's fault. Corporations become corporations because they can exploit a competitive advantage over and over and over. That's how you become a corporation. Right. You find a competitive advantage and you exploit it. Well, that becomes routine. And you got people like me coming along going, let's do this, let's do that. Let's try this. I'm messing up, the exploitation. I'm more about exploration, not exploitation. And that's where we had issues.
Right. But now one of the successes that you had there for sure, I mean, you had many, obviously, if you got promoted 9 times, but one of the things that you did was help create that advanced help desk system that was recognized for saving $250 million in its first year of application. So what was that like?
Yes. And that gave me the confidence, by the way, to leave UPS, a very, very fine company, by the way, extraordinary company. But we did that, and that was really CRM. What we were doing was CRM, and I saw the huge impact, and that's really how I got promoted the last couple of times. But what we did was say, across the enterprise, we should see customers, and we should see the activity of customers, and not just the people in the service department or the returns department. Let everybody see customer activity. And I did that at UPS, but then I was shocked as I went out that companies like Ralph Lauren, Chick-fil-A, all these companies didn't have it either. So that's where that was the whole start of CRM.
This would have been the early 90s?
This would have been 92, 93, 94.
Right.
I left August of 95, and I started my company October of 95 in the same space. What I did was just go out and say, hey, this is what UPS gave me a plaque for that. And I would carry the plaque around to CIOs, and that was my brochure.
Been there, done that. You need me.
So that was, but certainly, and then you need luck with companies, and UPS decided to outsource to who's the big mail company? I forget, they're not Hewlett Packard, the big mail company. But anyway, they decided to outsource all of IT. So guess what? As we started picking up accounts like Ralph Lauren and Chick-fil-A, I went and hired my people from UPS, where I had about 350 technicians, and I went and hired them and got the pick of the litter, so to speak. Of the 350, my first 50 employees came from UPS. UPS was loving it because they were outsourcing anyway.
Right.
The new people loved it because they were coming into an entrepreneurial company and they had already worked with me. And boom, we have a company.
So when you think back to the work you were doing there on this really big help desk thing, were there any situations or times where there were maybe you thought the message was clear, the direction was clear, but then the execution, I guess people actually doing the work had a different understanding where there was
Well,
lack of clarity?
was this at UPS or
Yeah,
STI?
UPS. I'm going to talk about STI coming up, but UPS.
Well, I had I had some very good bosses at UPS that kind of let me run with that. And it was very atypical of UPS, but I think they were Tom James, Rich Barrett's. They just said, if you want to do that, go do it. I remember they actually gave me money to go do it. And so that's where I operated. That whole thing, I kind of set direction. I set the communication and messaging. Now, having said that, it probably changed every day if I was involved with it. But that's on that particular project, I conceived the idea. I thought of the idea, and they said, go see if it works in this one district. And it had monumental impact on that one district. Then UPS came and said, we want you to put it in nationally. And then, of course, you got all the corporate politicians that got involved.
Right.
But it was such a great idea. Even that didn't kill it. And it had such great results. Even the corporate politicians that took credit for it, that was okay because it was so badly needed at UPS. And it turns out in every company in America, not just UPS. So we survived all of that.
Yeah. I remember in one of the articles that I read, you mentioned about the morning communication meetings where the truck drivers would all kind of congregate it before they, got in their trucks and drove their routes. And how powerful
the PCMs, pre-work communication meetings,
and how important that 3 minutes each day really, how really it made a difference. So can you elaborate on what that was like?
Well, first of all, if I had to pick a CEO, a founder who did just about every decision the right way, it would be Jim Casey, the founder of UPS. That was, PCMs was just one little minor part of how he designed that company. And Jim Casey, from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, was saying, and I thought it was a little wrong at the time. I mean, you couldn't have anybody at the company that was even distantly related to you. Nobody could date at the company. And he was ahead of the Me Too movement by 100 years. And he had people that monitored the company to make sure that stayed in force. And it was always said, if you try to get a cousin hired 1,000 miles away, Jim Casey would find out about it. Somehow he had the company bugged or something. But anyway, the PCM was part of his whole policy book on how you manage. And he came out with a policy book that I'm surprised has not been, I'm sure it's copyrighted, of course, but this policy book manual was everybody, you met for 3 minutes. You didn't go longer than 3 minutes. And it was come together before the start of the work. And you went and did that and the drivers had pre-tripped their package cars. And that was things you inspect before you leave. So you did a pre-trip, you did a PCM, and then you were dispatched. You went to school, by the way. Jim Casey sent you to a school to learn how to deliver a PCM. It was not just 3 minutes of shooting the bull. There was a very specific process.
Okay.
He came up with 365 methods to deliver a package.
Wow.
And so everything at UPS was designed. It was a designed company.
So you eventually left UPS and you moved on and started your own company, STI. So talk a little bit about what that was like, starting your own company. Was it something you did in your basement, or was there venture capital involved? How did that work?
No, we got to close to 500 employees or maybe one time over that, but never took venture capital a day in our life. But the times were different. Back then, you got big licensing fees for technology, and really who were the VCs of my company were my customers. And part of my value proposition, and from the day one, was they prepaid.
Right.
They prepaid, and that gave us some big checks to go and do things. Now, having said that, when you're hiring as many people as 150 in 1 month as we did, you got to have some capital. I had not a lot, but I had substantial UPS stock that I had bought over my 10 years there, and UPS had given me, and it was still private at the time, but the banks would loan money on it. So, you know, I, with customers and myself, and one finance guy out of Tennessee gave me $2 million, but I had a customer wire me $4 million one morning. He found out that we needed money, and I thought I was going to have to go to private equity. And he's like, "Hey, we can take care of that." And I said, "Well, what kind of interest rate?" And he said, "It's 5% fair." And I couldn't. I'm like, "Please wire that money as fast as you can." We actually got payroll tomorrow. So and you have to be careful of that, because you're like, if I tell him we got payroll tomorrow, would he say, "I'm not going to send him money? If you need money that badly?"
Yeah.
But he started laughing because, you know, of all the mistakes we made. And I tell people, being the first in the CRM, I should have had an $8 billion company. I should have had a much bigger company, but all the big guys got in, and we had to battle it out. And, you know, we're still very proud of what we did, but what we were most proud of, and Gartner Group recognized us as execution and visionary leader in technology, and everybody else. The next smallest company was $4 billion. That was in that list. And we were this company because our customer service was, we set new standards for it in IT. We were just the pioneer of setting new standards. So it was a fun time. It was tough, but we made a lot of mistakes, but we did one or two things right that helped us exit. You know, I wound up selling that to Mellon Ventures and Satish Sanan, who had built Global One. So, you know, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You just got to make one or two, three good decisions.
Right. It's a kind of an investing strategy. You need one 20 bagger to wipe out your 10 that go to zero, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
But one thing that you said there, I think on both sides of that you said that Gartner had to recognize you because you guys did such a great job at customer service and relationships. And I got to believe you must have had some pretty good relationships with that client that was willing to wire you $4 million. What are some of the secrets of how do you really establish those good customer relationships or those good relationships?
Well, 87% of the Fortune 1000 bought from us. Now, we had to go down to a very a narrow niche in CRM, but we were the innovators and the pioneers and everything in that space. I mean, what I just didn't do is I did not scale it out on a global basis like a Siebel could or a PeopleSoft and people like that. If I had moved it to Silicon Valley, that was probably what I should have done. That probably kept me from being a billionaire, is that I kept it in Atlanta. And I was advised to move it to Silicon Valley, and I, you know, so proud of that. I'm a Southerner, and I'm like, we'll beat those guys' asses all day long. Yeah, they beat me up like a pup. You know, but that probably was the $1 billion mistake. So we were the innovators, the pioneers, and we got into a niche that there's a downside to being so great at customer service. And that's all that client could think of us for is our niche. And I would go to these great clients and say, "Hey, we got this new product over here." And they'd go, "But you're the Cliff Company." They called me the Cliff Company, which is technically the name of CliffCo now. They said, "But you're Cliff's company. Y'all do this." And the people who bought us said, "We just want entry points into all your customers." And I'm like, I'm telling you, they wouldn't buy anything else from me, but maybe you guys can sell them some stuff. But it was like being typecast for a role. You know, you see somebody on TV and then you see them in a movie and you go, "Oh, that's Mary Tyler Moore." And it was because we were so good at what we did. And I guess I am bragging, but it actually we became so good at it, it kept us smaller.
Right. But you were in your niche, but you were best in class, which is always helpful.
Yeah, we were the best in class, but and then we made a couple of mistakes. One was not going to Silicon Valley, and the other one was just being a evangelist for our product and our service. I mean, we believed in it so deeply. And what we did, I mean, we started, as we grew 100, 200, 300 people, we started attracting all the evangelists in the industry for that product line. So Pete McGarran, who worked for Pepsi and everything, wanted to come work for us because we were considered, the pioneers.
Right.
So it led to a point where they wouldn't buy anything from us, but that product and that service.
Well, that wraps up part one of my conversation with Cliff Oxford, serial entrepreneur, columnist, and author. Coming up in part two, we'll discuss why he prefers managing by commitment over big, hairy, audacious goals or BHAGs.
That's where I have a little problem with the BHAGs. But now I think, hey, you should put down on management by commitment the grandest goals you can think of that we can achieve. Really think big. Don't think small. Think big. You can still think big and you can think commitment.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett. To find out more about Clint, go to projectsuccess.com or pick up Clint's book, The Project Success Method, at Amazon.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.